We've all heard the phrase, you want what you can't have. But when you're limerent, that's not just a saying anymore. It's the entire emotional reality that you step into. Because there's something about being chosen, especially by someone who hasn't exactly chosen you yet, that can feel absolutely intoxicating. And I'm not just talking about attraction. I'm talking about a deep, almost aching fantasy of what it would mean to you if this person that you've become limerent over, picked you. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. On this channel, we talk a lot about how to take our lives back from the lasting effects of childhood trauma, of anxiety, and of emotional dysregulation in general. And we do this because we want to be able to live our lives on our own terms.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much.
In this video, I'm talking specifically about one-sided or unrequited limerence, even limerence that becomes limerence because the connection can't form into a solid relationship for whatever reason, for whatever impediment is in the way. And these cases of limerence where the connection can't solidify into something real, they make up a substantial number of the total cases of limerence. Some would say a lot more than half. So it affects a lot of us. We're talking about the kind of limerent episode where the other person hasn't actually stepped into a real mutual relationship with you. Because yes, sometimes limerence, it does happen between people who go on to form a functioning relationship. They both want to, they have real compatibility and interest, and they have the ability to form a relationship. Very important. But this is not that. This is about the kind of limerence that thrives in that space between, where reality and fantasy barely touch, if at all. Why does being chosen feel so powerful in limerence? When you're limerent, so much of the fantasy of limerence is not about them, about this other person. Instead, it's about you as seen through their eyes. You imagine what it would feel like for them to notice you, to think about you, to want your attention, and to want to give you their attention, to long for you, to desire you. Psychologists sometimes call this the observer's gaze, this act of seeing yourself from someone else's perspective. And in limerence, because we want so much to have the other person's validation and to have their reciprocity of feeling, that outside perspective is everything. Because if they choose you, it feels like proof that you're enough. Not just that you're enough, but that you, humble you who doesn't think yourself worthy of this person's attention, a big feature of limerence, you can become exactly that. Someone who is worthy of this person's attention, someone who is worthy of this person's love. And the harder they've been to get, and the higher you've placed them above you as someone who can approve or disapprove of you as a human being, the stronger that validation would feel to you if you were to get it. But here's where the trouble steps in. Rejection doesn't always kill that fantasy. Sometimes rejection just supercharges it, gives it extra power, especially when it's mild or an uncertain kind of rejection. The kind of rejection where you sort of know that the other person isn't into you as much as you'd like them to be, but you're choosing not to really look at that fact head on, or the kind of mild rejection where you've been put in the friend zone or in the situationship zone, or where they've left the door just slightly ajar to what could perhaps happen in the future if only the wind blew in the right direction on Tuesday. You know the kind of rejection I mean, right? I'm not sure how I feel about you, and my life is so very complicated, and my job is so stressful, and the price of gas has gone up, and groceries are so expensive. But hey, if all of those things magically resolve themselves in the world, we would totally make a fantastic couple. That kind of rejection, the kind of rejection that leaves you hoping. And this kind of uncertain or unclear rejection, it makes sure that we get that dopamine spike that comes from not having certainty about the outcome. The uncertainty itself creates scarcity, and that scarcity ties directly into the brain's reward system. We become addicts for the validation we get from this person, even if that validation is sparse or barely there. Even better, if it's here and there intermittently, that really hooks us in. It really pours fuel on the addiction pathways of the brain. So the brain doesn't necessarily file this type of rejection under not interested, go ahead and move on. Sometimes it files it under challenge accepted. Especially if you naturally tend to overfunction, to cling, to become anxious. It's just more fuel to your own inner fire and turmoil. So every little scrap of attention in this case, it feels like hope. And every silence or even lack of contact feels like a mystery that you need to look underneath a little bit deeper instead of nothing, which silence usually is. But we forget that a lot in Limerence. And without realizing it, this gives you the push to start building a story. And in that story, you're the central character, and the happy ending is you being chosen by this person. Because when you act from this hunger for validation, you've externalized validation and approval in a way that has now put your worth in this other person's hands. So the stakes are very high for you because your self-worth is on the chopping block. That's a big deal. The ego also plays its part. Yes, this is mostly an emotional obsession, and it ties into very deep psychological needs that we have that are often buried in our subconscious. And we've talked about that in several of my Limerence videos on this channel. But if we're being honest, it's also about ego. Being chosen by someone you can't quite have isn't just about love, it's also about winning and about feeling special enough to be the exception to be chosen. Sometimes we become limerent over someone who doesn't like us in the beginning, and then they show us a little bit of interest after, but not really enough to signify anything substantial. Other times it's someone who shows a lot of interest in the beginning, but then sort of drops off. And the ego whispers, if I can get this person to want me after all, or to want me at the end of the day, then I must really be worth something. Because the facts and truth of rejection are quite simply this: what we want goes directly against what the other person wants. But in these kinds of limerent episodes, where what we clearly want is not what they want, and perhaps they know what's good for them, or they've detected incompatibilities that they're not okay with, and now they're showing a lack of interest, well, the ego can make us believe that if we can just change their mind and become in a way the exception, the thing that they don't actually know is good for them, then wow, how worthy would we be, right? And this is especially relevant when we go through periods of life when we feel less than, even more so than we usually do because of long-standing trauma. When we're feeling weak or confused or unclear about our goals or about what the future holds for us, then drawing a person to us who is a big prize in our eyes and then being validated and chosen by that person, it can temporarily rectify or at least offer some relief from the blow to our ego that difficult periods of life can dole out for all of us. And the ego works hard. It works in underhanded ways to convince us that we're acting from a higher place, that we're acting on behalf of real love or destiny or genuine affection we feel for this person. But sometimes when we dig underneath the surface at our own motives, we find our ego sitting there in the dark like a comic book villain drawing up superhero costumes to cover up our real needs for ego gratification. And that's hard to admit to ourselves. Our ego makes sure of that. In this way, we can end up using another person to try to sort of lift ourselves up, which, when you think about it, is not a very kind thing to do to them either. Although we do it, we all try to get ourselves validated. But to place someone in this slot that we assign to them as ego gratifier or confidence booster, if anything, it gets in the way of even getting to know the other person as a real human being with their own needs and their own ideas about love or partnership or what they want for themselves. We try to override that for our own validation. So this whole hopium balloon that we sort of like cling onto and fly off on, this kind of one-sided limerence, is how we get stuck in this perpetual loop of hope. And we play the what if movie in our mind over and over again. What if they call me to tell me that they're crazy about me? What if I let them go and they realize afterward how much they really loved me, but I've ruined it by walking away? So I have to keep clinging on to it. I have to hold on to the small hope that it will turn in my favor, that I will win this thing. What if this person suddenly sees that, well, I'm perfect for them? What if they realize that we are destined to be together? And the fantasy of that, the fantasy of you being discovered as invaluable, as beautiful, as intelligent, as capable, or whatever it is that gives you that sense of personal validation, whatever it is that you fantasize about being seen as by this person, that fantasy becomes its own reward, which is why we get lost in our ruminations, our thoughts about this person. And this is the most important part you have to remember, because being validated and chosen by this person, it is your top priority in some cases. Whether or not the real life version of this person would be a good match for you, whether they would make you happy, or whether you would make them happy, it's not even that relevant to you. It sort of takes a back seat, sometimes far, far back, to your need to be validated by this person, which might be your priority in this case. And you can completely ignore or dismiss the fact that this person is not even someone you could have a good relationship with. Because again, you're unconsciously prioritizing something else than compatibility, namely validation or the reciprocity of your own feelings. So then what's the best way to get off of this hopium balloon ride? Really think about what you're fantasizing about when you fantasize about this person. Are you fantasizing about them, about their character traits, about who they are, how much you enjoy them as a human being, how much you like to spend time with them, how much you enjoy their personality, their jokes, their stories? Or when you picture them in your mind and you interact with that internal object of them that you carry around in your own head, are they mostly just pouring attention into you, adoring you, loving you, showering you with their interest and their desire, making you feel seen and valued and chosen? Meaning, is the fantasy mostly about them? Or is it mostly about what they are providing for you? So ask yourself, do I actually want this particular person? Or do I really, really want the intoxicating feeling of being wanted by them? Second, look for other places in your life where you can feel chosen and validated and seen, places where you're not trying so hard to earn or to prove yourself, but rather where you can just show up and be valued for who you are now, in this moment, in whatever struggle or hardship you might find yourself in life. Find ways or places in your life where you can begin to spot your own value. Because when you start to experience that on your own, the grip that the validation that the limerent object can provide you with, its grip on you will start to unshackle itself, to loosen. Limerence tends to feed on distance, on uncertainty, and on the idea that if you could get this one chosen person to choose you as their person, then you would feel better inside of yourself. But the truth underneath that is that you don't need to be chosen by this person to be anything, to be enough, to be worthy. What you need to do is retract your validation, to bring it back to where you validate yourself through things that you are able to create in your own life as a source of validation, so that you can stop externalizing it to this one person that you've become limerent over. I have an entire Limerence playlist with videos like this one that talk more about why we choose particular people, what we're looking for from these people, and how we can turn it back to ourselves so that we can detach from the need to be validated by people we become limerent over. And I'll put a link to that playlist in the description below. If you want to go deeper, the next video I would watch is why you got hooked on them, not someone else, because that is a very, very important piece of this puzzle of limerence, and I've linked that specific video as well below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing and liking so we can keep going together. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.